So hello and welcome to Kitty Talks. We share inspirational life stories that empower you to create yours. And today I have with me a gentleman who is a very gifted writer, author. He wrote this amazing book, which I thoroughly encourage you to go and buy. It's called A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment, and I will get him to explain that title. But it's a fantastic book all about the power of gratitude, intention, and surrender and trust. And I read it and I just knew that we had to get Tim on the podcast. So Tim, welcome to Kitty Talks.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And I am sure we're going to have a wonderful conversation. So, so for my listeners, would you mind just sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world currently?
Well, I about 3.5 years ago, I left the corporate world. A little earlier than that, I got an opportunity to ghostwrite a blog for somebody, and then this person fell behind on their book deal and asked me if I wanted to help write their book. So I actually quit my 9-to-5 and I jumped all in on that. And when I was done with that, that took about 6 months. And when I was done, I asked him if you could go anywhere to finish a book, where would you go? And he said, San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. So I moved down to Mexico to finish my book. And I've kind of been in between Seattle and Mexico since. And so for the past 3.5 years, I've been making my living as an author, a ghostwriter, and a writing coach.
Fantastic. And have you always known that you wanted to be an author, a writer?
I have. I mean, I have since I was about 17. That's when I first started keeping a journal. And, you know, I don't know if it's nature or nurture. You know, my father was a World War II Purple Heart veteran. I came late in my parents' life. Surprise, you're not retiring anytime soon. And my closest sibling is 9 years older. So, you know, maybe all that time, it was almost like being an only child at some points. And there was this, actually, it was Sunday, September 29th, 1991. It was like I was 17 and I kind of was like in love with this, like puppy love with this girl. And that same weekend, sort of a fellow soccer player, not somebody I knew really well, but like walked off the bus and dropped dead. And for whatever reason, the love and the death, that Sunday night I got in my bed and I got a notebook and I just started journaling. And I probably have 55 journals of my life on paper since.
Amazing.
A little madness, crazy or madness, who knows?
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And so it sounds to me like you were channeling or just processing your emotions like through your journals.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, you know, I think that's really it, you know? I mean, I was thinking about this maybe this morning, and it's just, you know, our emotions, our thoughts, they're all energy. And this body, this vessel is the expression of that energy. And we do it in art or communication or creations. And so, I don't know, for me, it just happened. That was, I needed to get these things out of me and understand my place in the world. And it's still the way I process, you know, my life and the world. And no matter what I do, like, I'm kind of at this crossroads, like, what do I do next? And I mean, it doesn't matter because I'm going to be writing one way or the other, you know. It's like, am I going to be able to be writing full time or do something else? But, you know, it's now my nature. So it's how my brain is wired.
And when did you know you wanted to turn the journaling into a career?
I mean, it was always, since I was like 17, I you know, it was like, despite all of this fear and doubt and not taking years to call myself a writer or an artist, there was this deep voice deep down that was like, well, why not me? I mean, somebody's got to be the voice of a generation. Not saying that I am that. I mean, I aspire to be that, or at least like, you know, one little tiny voice. But, you know, even at that young age, I was a deeper thinker than I think my contemporaries. And
Mm.
at that age, I knew like the next frontier was the internal frontier. Like we were on the brink of a spiritual revolution. Like I look at my journals and I was writing about that when I was like 18 years old.
Wow.
And I don't know how or where that came from. I mean, I do know, I grew up in like sort of a very Catholic upbringing. My parents were, you know, towards the end of their life, daily mass type person, but then at some point, I was a philosophy major, and, maybe one time I took some mushrooms and that opened up my consciousness to like, the universal oneness. That actually totally shifted my perspective. And I was like, I think it really kind of was a pivotal point to put me on this other path, because sort of where I grew up from in New Jersey, it was like the path was like, going to this prep school, to this college, to
Yeah,
Wall
yeah. It's what
Street,
we're
or
all told to do is get a good job, get a good education, and
yeah,
pay bills.
yeah. So, I mean, I was trying to fit into that world for many years, and it either spit me out or I spit myself out. And
Mm.
I would freelance for a while, and then I would take off to travel and create, whether that was like my buddy and I doing our own like spoof travel show in Europe, or me volunteering at an orphanage in Tanzania, or when my mom passed away, buying a one-way ticket to India, which is
Mm.
the genesis of this book, the
Mm.
inciting incident, as I like to call
Mm.
it.
Well, I've read your book, and so it's because I don't. It's not about you, but it is about you, if that makes sense. So it's kind of based on your life, but not. It's kind of there's a fictional license to it, wasn't there? Like
Yeah.
from what you say, but one of the things I'd love to talk about, because it's something I really was influenced by, and I know from your book that you really struggled with it too. Is like we're so it's so built in our culture that we should live a certain way, that we should, like you just said, go to school, go to college, go to Wall Street, get married, have babies, have children, and there's this because I was never that person either. Like I got spat out by the system, and I didn't fit in, and I didn't understand why it felt so uncomfortable. And I think it's difficult for people, because if we're not the archetype of the get married, settle down types, then we can struggle. And of course, I think being creative, that you are, you're potentially on a different path, and no one really talks about that. So I'd just love for you to talk to our audience about how you found your way through that, really.
Well, I mean, if I had a formula, I would be a millionaire. It's just, and I'm really struggling with it a little bit right now. Um, I kind of, I feel like we first talked in like late May,
Mm.
mid-May, and I was
Mm.
in Sintra, Portugal, in the middle of this giant expansion, traveling through Europe. And then something happened and I had to come back to Seattle, and I wasn't planning. And every time I come back to Seattle, I go through this like massive contraction. Um, I think it's just like I've outgrown like the frequency of this
Mm.
place. And, um, but I can't say that I've ever had a plan. I mean, I do have a plan of like where I want to get and everything, but it's just, I think you just have to have the courage to keep following that path and keep
Mm.
taking that step every day.
Mm.
And the hardest thing for me, my whole book is about surrender and trust. And I'm in this whole new space right now of going through that again. It's like, people will talk to me and be like, but you're the master of this. You wrote this book. Look at how everything unfolds in your life. But when you're in the shit
Trenches.
as
Yeah.
like contraction, and you can't let the magic in. And I've just kind of, I think in the last like 2 days, sort of, it's almost like a fever break or something, it's like, oh, okay, I can start to breathe again. And I've been thinking, I just started like writing down some notes for possibly a new essay. And it's really like, this is what it feels like to be in the chrysalis, a
Mm.
caterpillar becoming a butterfly. You are in this pressure chamber,
Mm.
and it's adjusting the form and function of your entire life, and you just have to sit it out and wait it through. And trust this natural process.
Mm.
It's like, in the beginning of the book, there's this like note from my mother, and I'll just use me. I mean, it's Thomas, it's fictionalized. There's some distance, but it's like, my mom said like, something about like, it's nobody ever said it was going to be easy. You'd like, but you got to trust and you got to just move forward. And so that's kind of what I've always done. I do what I do, which is I write. And I mean, at some point I was like, I want to, I started doing Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, and I was like, I want to create a mentor. And I mean, I got an opportunity to work with him. And, when I think about it, I've now like either edited or ghostwritten or helped write books for 2 New York Times bestselling authors in this field of sort of transformation. And, and when I can step out of my own whatever I'm in and look at the bigger picture, like it appears that there is some divine sort of hand at play to, first of all, for me to learn from these incredible spiritual teachers, and then also for me to be able to use my skills to amplify their message. So I don't know. I mean, for anybody that is sort of on the path or searching, I mean, I think you just have to keep asking the questions and keep moving forward. And, is there more? What's next? Show me. Like,
Beautiful.
Have a communication with the universe, because it is actually interactive and malleable to your will and who you are being.
Brilliant. And I think, can you talk our listeners through because what you do in the book, which I think is beautiful, and I've totally adopted it because I just love it, is you write your intention. So you write basically what you're grateful for. So could you just explain that process? Because I think it's a fantastic way for people to create what they want to happen in their life.
Well, when my mom passed away, I had basically a decade of sick parents. They were bookended by a decade of sick parents. My dad was like, had lung cancer, died in like 2004, but was sick for a while. And unbeknownst to me, my mother was, because I was living on the West Coast and my family was on the East Coast. And my mother was just deteriorating rapidly from Parkinson's, dementia, you name it, whatever. And so you think you're like prepared for your parents' death. But then when it happens, I wrote in the book, like, when your parents die, it's like a tornado or a tsunami sweeps through your life. And no matter how hard you try to rebuild, something intangible is lost forever. So I thought I was ready for this, and it just rocked my world. And I was super lost. And a friend of my sister's is like an energy healer. And, we had a session, just talking. And she's like, okay, you're a writer. Yeah. I want you to do I want you to do this exercise. I want you to write down 5 things you're grateful for and 5 things you want to create. And you're going to find that the things you create today are going to be the things you're grateful for in the future. So I was kind of like, I'll try anything at this point. So, I went and got like a $2 notebook, and I just started writing down things. And, at the time I wasn't working, and I was like, all right, I surrender money, everything. I just want the right job for right now, a cool team. I mean, that showed up in like a week after 2.5 months of not working or something like that. And, I was like, I knew I was going to take off to travel. And I was like, I want an income while I'm traveling. I want to volunteer. And so this right job at the right time was supposed to be a 3-month contract. It turned into a 6-month contract. These are the things you can't see in the present moment when you just have to surrender. And at the end of the 6 months, my boss was like, he pulled me aside. He's like, hey, would you be interested in working 10 to 20 hours a week while you're traveling? And I was going to India for 3 months. And I was like, hell yeah, I would. So I went to India, and I was making money. And when I came back, well, I had miles, so I flew through Seattle. I came to surprise my family for a family reunion. And then I flew through Seattle. And when I was in Seattle, I stopped at the office again. And my boss just pulled me aside, and he's like, hey man, come here. He's like, just bill me for 30 hours a week for the last 3 months of your contract. So I went back to Asia, and I was getting paid like a US salary, 30 hours a week. And then I was working with a friend of mine as his photographer assistant, and he was paying me $500 a week, free room, booze, board, business hotels. And I'm like, just a backpacker. And as far as like wanting to be of service, I wound up volunteering for this guy I got connected to, and he like owned an eco ashram, and I'm like, I don't even know what the hell an eco ashram is, but sure, I'll do it, And turns out he's like India's, if not one of the world's most important environmental lawyers. I thought I was keeping floors, and I was like writing grants for him, and I just got to tail, this guy for 2 months, like one of the most extraordinary human beings I've ever met. This American scientist called him the most important lawyer in India since Gandhi. He like through the state of India created a green zone around the Taj Mahal. And I mean, I think it's a lot easier to be in that space of magic and flow when you're traveling, because the state of travel is a state of surrender.
But I have to say, I used your process. Like when I was reading your book, I was writing down. So I would be writing down the things I was grateful for, and then I'd write the things that what I wanted to happen. And what I thought was really fascinating, and this is what I talk about in Dharma. So you set an intention, you take action towards it, and then you have no tension, intention, attention, no tension. And what I found with your process was it worked beautifully, because at night I'd just get in this beautiful energy of what I was grateful for. Again, high vibration. And then I'd work out what the things that I would like wanting to create. So one of them, I was having a wellness lunch, and I wanted 10 women to come to the lunch. And then I'd forget basically what I'd written down. And I'd go about what I was doing. And then the universe always likes to play tricks on us. I remember having all these women cancel for my lunch. And then anyway, long story short, the day of the lunch, we got 10 women. And I looked back through my journal, and I was like, okay, this, it's working. And time after time. But what I loved was, I think it's that whole, you're in a beautiful energy of the gratitude, and then you're setting your intentions, but ultimately you're letting them go. That's surrender again. And you're trusting the universe has your back. And it worked time and time and time. I don't know why I've stopped doing it. I'm going to start doing it again. But it worked time and time again. It was beautiful.
Yeah. Dr. Joe Dispenza would say, gratitude is the ultimate state of receivership. I mean, I still do it almost every day. I've been doing it since like October 2010. And now I'm pretty blown away. I'm like getting letters from people around the world and telling me that they're doing this. I mean, I never would have imagined that, and telling me all the things that they're like creating and manifesting. And I'm like, wow, all right, this is cool.
Excellent.
It's happening. Yeah.
But I know what you're saying about being, when you're traveling, you're kind of in that naturally surrendered place. Whereas when you're static and you're living in your house, it's less, the environment is less, but I think it still works.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to kind of raise your energy to another level, I think. I mean, I'm coaching myself right now, being in this sort of static environment of Seattle that I'm not sure I necessarily fit into anymore, but like I am settling into it, and I have to rise above it. I mean, energy is, as we know, like it is the creative force of the universe, and it is ruling everything. It is ruling the seen and the unseen world. So.
And I think that just reflecting on it a little bit more, because I think when you travel, you generally tend to go towards the most, because I always talk about following your highest excitement. So there's a formula that is, when you follow your highest excitement to the best of your ability with no expectation on the outcome, you're walking the optimal path in life. And that excitement, like the gratitude, is a really high vibration. And so even though it's not logical in the sense of, you might, like, I know with your trip, like you'd go to a waterfall, or you'd just go where you felt called, but actually what you were doing was following that excitement in the moment. And of course what was happening was the right people were turning up. And I love the story about the party, where you got randomly invited to that party, like after because that was all beautiful synchronicity as well.
Yeah, that was crazy. I landed in New Delhi without a plan or a clue. I bought a one-way ticket to India. I didn't even have a Lonely Planet. The first 2 days I was just in my like jet lagged as hell in my hotel room. Like, what have I done? This is the worst, the worst decision I've ever. Oh, it was terrible. And then, one email changed everything and launched the trip. And, it was, when I think back, I'm like, how the hell did I have the courage to do that? I remember having like practically a breakdown. I think I wrote about it in the book, like on the way to the airport. I was just like, what am I doing? Why am I leaving this great life behind in Seattle? What am I trying to prove? Why am I doing this? But really, I mean, that and most of the stuff I have actually done has been for my art, because I knew at a young age when I was in high school, like reading Joyce and Steinbeck and maybe college, Jack Kerouac or something, I was like, if I want to have an interesting life and write about interesting things, I have to have interesting life experiences. So that has really been the focal point. I mean, to the detriment of, like a steady career and sometimes relationships. And I was just listening to this podcast with Oprah and Maya Angelou, this morning, and she was saying something about like, to be really excellent at something, you have to sacrifice. I don't want to think that. I want to think more positively, but maybe it shouldn't, think like, oh, maybe it shouldn't be that hard. But really, like, if you want to be excellent at something, you kind of have to be doing more than the next person. And it's not about the other person, though. It's about, becoming the best of your ability. And like, I'm always just, the way I experience the world is through words and through language. And so I am always kind of churning, I look at something and I'm like, how could I describe that? And so in that sense, it's become hardwired in me, but I don't even know what we were talking about that just kind of.
Well, the point I took from it was very much how if you're going to be an interesting, amazing writer, then you have to have an interesting, amazing life. And I think, what the parallels are is I think when we're trailblazers, I'm all about Dharma, which is fulfilling our highest potential, the right path of action. And that is all about us unlocking our potential and becoming the highest and best version of ourselves. And that pushes you out your comfort zone because you can't stay safe. You can't stay in the Seattle niche or in the kind of, you have to grow. And what you're doing is pushing yourself in a way that's making you grow. But at the same time, like you said, you're becoming an incredible writer. I think you're already an incredible writer because I've read your book. Yeah. But for people listening, for you to do your Dharma, it isn't the safe path, but it's the most rewarding path you can ever take. Like, I think.
Yeah. I've been on my website, which is acuriousear.com, under like the blog's essay tab. I've kind of been sort of chronicling this journey that I lived in Mexico for like eight months or something like that. And, I sometimes have to reread myself because when I get into these sort of spaces of contraction, like actually last night, I wound up listening to this podcast. Like I was like listening to this podcast I did sort of right when I got to Mexico. And, or actually it's a whole long story, but I was listening to it and, when you get into these spaces of contraction, you feel like, oh my God, this is it, this is over. But then when you can ascend that and look at it from a higher level, it's like, oh, evidence in life shows that this is just part of the wave and this is part of the transformation. And I mean, I think before we started talking, the last 2 days, I was away in Portland for a couple days and spent some time with family and friends. And, when I got back, I just took this long walk and I was thinking about being, in the chrysalis, the butterfly becoming the caterpillar. And, I think I already said this. I don't know if we said this in this conversation or before we started, but it's just so. I'm going to have to spend some. I'm looking forward to articulating this. Right now, it's just sort of amorphous ideas and stuff like that. But yeah, again, it's just
I think it's having
anybody who's listening.
faith. It's having the
That,
faith, isn't it?
that is it. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because when you're in that period of, I don't know what's happening and I don't know why this is happening. And, especially if it's the dark patch, and maybe something is a bit more challenging, it's having the trust and faith that there is a higher order and a higher reason to it.
yeah,
And so we don't get stuck.
yeah. My sister said something really profound to me, and you read the book,
Mm-hmm.
and let me ask you a question. When you were 17, did you have a dream of what you wanted to do?
Only to be like a sport or adventure teacher, to take
Okay.
people out and have adventures. Like I was big into sports and outdoors and leading people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've read, I find it to be such a pivotal age because you have this passion of youth and everything. And between you and your dream, there is no static because you don't have enough life experience to like create that static and like knock you off your center. And my sister pointed out, like, you write about the dream of the 17-year-old, you talk about it in your podcasts and stuff like that, but you've actually achieved the dream of the 17-year-old. Like, what's next? You have to redefine your vision now. Like, what is the dream of the 45-year-old self? And I was like, oh my God, yeah. I mean, I need to step out of that kind of whatever that energy is. It's like roaming the world, curiosity. Like now I want like more stability and everything. Like I've already done all that. And like now I've done all that. I've collected the stories. I have the wisdom. And now I want to, this is, in my mind, this is the first of at least 3 or 4, like a series of books about the evolution of consciousness, really. And the awakening and what transformation looks and feels like. And it's not a linear path. It is like, it's falling down, it's falling, it's actually falling forward. If you can trust yourself, you are falling forward, but it's not a linear path. And the only thing that we all share is the internal experience of life.
Mm.
We're all connected into this field of energy and consciousness.
Mm. Yeah. And I think once you start to do this work, that's it for life now. You've woken up, you realize that everything's interconnected, and actually there's more and more layers of this stuff that you just have to keep going through. But I love what you said about the next stage of your vision. So what is the next stage of your vision? You've already done some amazing things. You're a published author. You've worked for and we have to give ourselves credit, because I think as human beings, we're like, I was talking to my Dharma group the other day, and I was saying you tend to sort of like a goldfish. You're trying to get used to the water you're in. So if you look back, you're now a published author, you have worked with some, top personal development gurus, you've traveled the world, so give yourself credit for where you come from, but what's next? Like, what's the next evolution? So tell me about that.
I mean, I self-published this book for a variety of reasons, and synchronicities and serendipities. And it's been a year, and I've sold more books than a traditionally published book.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sort of on the hunt for an agent. And I'm pretty, one of my favorite podcasters, Mark Maron, is like, the only time you start to make money is when people figure out how to make money off of you. But, you need sort of sometimes that industrial complex to launch you to the next level. So, I would like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I would like the book to become a movie. A friend of mine, I was out with the drinks last night. He's like, hey man, do you want me to text my buddy who's like the head of Amazon Studios or something like that? And I was like, sure, why not? Because you said it, and I think it could be a very good movie. Like, and when I wrote it, I had that sort of, I wrote it with that kind of in mind, which is why I made certain choices I also made. But, I want to be able to get my message out bigger and wider, and I want to inspire people and help wake them up and live better lives. I want creative freedom. I mean, there's a couple opportunities. I'm just like sitting and waiting, kind of playing this time game. But there's an opportunity to work on a book with the guy who has a pretty interesting story of awakening, and another guy. I think it was right after I talked to you. Um, this guy and I had been talking for about 4 months about working on a book, and when we got to the financials, it was way lower than I was like, I'm sorry, I can't live on that. I can't even entertain that. And then he's like, all right, at some point he's like, I'm going to throw some skin in the game if you're up for a little risk. I was like, okay, what's that? He's like, I'm going to fly you to Portugal and we're going to meet for 3 days and see if we want to work together. And, either we start working right then or you're on your own from there. And I was like, okay. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I was in Europe. So he changed it at the last minute. We met on the coast of France and then drove through the Pyrenees to the Mediterranean in France. So I went on this road trip with this stranger, basically. And, he staying at like 4-star hotels, like Michelin restaurants. And he's like, I just want you to write a story about it that I can use for my own PR, and we'll use this as a litmus test. So anyway, being a writer and not one short on words, I wound up writing this 22-page story about this journey. He loved it. And he's like, oh my God, I could totally see this as a movie. And so there's that. And then there's actually a possibility of working on a film that would become a TV series in Mexico. They're like trying to source the funding down there right now. So I'm just trying to, hold on and trust. But I want to get into, I've never articulated this, but I kind of want my writing to be sort of my side gig, my personal writing, like what I do on the side, like, because I really kind of miss that team, that team collaboration thing. And I've always thought I wanted to be, working on a film or something. And actually one more thing, I just like in meditation the other day, downloaded an idea that would be like a show, my own show actually on Gaia TV. And I mean, I have a connection there. So I just kind of wrote up, I have 2 proposals. Haven't done anything with them yet, but it's interesting hearing myself talk because, this is all just living between these 2 temples,
So my challenge to you then, Tim, is you've got a lot, right? There's a lot that you want to do. Get really clear and get clarity. And for our listeners, okay, this is what we do with Dharma. Get clear because you're a radio signal. And what you put out in the world comes back. So if we're fuzzy in the sense of, oh, I think I want this, or I want that, or I'm not sure, I don't want this, or if we're a little bit woolly in the sense of we don't know exactly what our vision is, then that's kind of what we're putting out. So it's good to have irons in the fire, definitely, don't get me wrong. But I think the way I would get you to look at it would be when you wake up, what's your day look like? What are you doing for that? Where are you living? What's beside you? Kind of, do you get up and exercise? Do you get up and swim? And then write from that place as if you're there, and also see what comes through as well. Because when we do that, it's I've done it so many times and it's worked beautifully. Like when I was manifesting my partner, or when the life I live now was my previous kind of, day in the life of, and now the next one's like a bigger jump.
Totally. I mean, I'm ready for that next jump. And I am often, there's this fine line between, intention and then leaving room for the unknown.
Absolutely.
And maybe
too attached.
Maybe I leave too much room for the unknown. One of my mentors in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, where I was living. She's like, she said the same thing as you. She's like, you are clearly a powerful generator. Look at all these things that show up in your life, but they're not exactly what you want. I mean, they are like little aspects of what you want, which is why you have to keep drilling down and refining that dream and vision you have, whether that is in your mental rehearsal and meditation or writing it down or the gratitude and intention journal. But it's like, it's a continuous process of refinement, wouldn't you say?
Mm. It's such a tricky one because it's like, you're totally right. You get the clarity, but then ultimately you've got to let it go.
Yeah.
So it's kind of such a fine line because you do need to know what you want, not how you're going to get it because you block it. But then you ultimately, so what I tend to do is I tend to have a book where I I can't draw, but I have a big book where I draw what I want in my life to look like. And then I just put it away. And then every now and again, I go and add to it, you know. My husband and I'll tell you what we're manifesting because obviously we're putting it out. Because again, I believe by putting it out in the world, it's like speaking it into existence. But we have like a mini retreat center that we've built here with our house, and in the gardens we've got barns, and we're just turning the barn into a yoga studio. But it feels like, well, this feels like a warm up, Tim. I think we're kind of, you know, the next level of that will be a bigger version, and so that's what we're now pulling in. But we did the work on it and put it away, you know.
Yeah. It's
But
like, write it down, close the book, forget about it.
It's done.
Yeah.
But while we've got all these wonderful people listening to you, because we do have about 10,000 people that listen to this podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast, you've heard what Tim is looking for. Let's use the universe. So if you're an agent or anybody connected to the publishing industry, I really recommend you read this book because it's bloody good and you won't be able to put it down. And I don't really read fiction. I'm a bit of a personal development junkie. And I just loved this because it's on my wavelength, because obviously it's like spirituality and all the things I'm into. And I think I read it, like a few days just because I couldn't put it down. So, if you're out there and you can help Tim with his book deal or with a writing gig or something amazing, then please get in touch with him. And how can people find you, Tim?
Well, first of all, that's the ultimate compliment. So thank you. Since I was like 17 years old, I imagined people, when I wrote this book, like just not being able to put it down and consuming it like on an airplane or staying up late at night. And I've gotten letters from people and they're like, you kept me up till 2:00 in the morning last night. So, and people have like binged through it. And one of my readers, I was like, I want to be synonymous with Cheryl Strayed and Elizabeth Gilbert. And like one of my readers reached out to me. She was like sitting with her mom who had Alzheimer's and dementia. And she's like, I can't put your book down. She reached out 12 hours later. You never forget your first. She was like, I read the whole book in one sitting. Elizabeth Gilbert is a friend of mine. I'm sending her your book. And then I have another connection I didn't even know about to Cheryl Strayed. And so somebody sent my book to Cheryl Strayed. But, these are, I'm sure they get like 10,000 books, every week to check out. But I mean, I guess that's a positive thing. But, as far as getting a hold of me, my website is acuriousyear.com. And there's a beautiful book trailer that was filmed in India. And my nephew scored the music, and he's also created a soundtrack. So we're looking to get a music deal with him too as well. So imagine that movie with an original soundtrack and created within the same family. But yeah, acuriousyear.com. Check out my essays. They're kind of the big ideas, some of the big ideas for what I think will be in my fourth book. And I'm really kind of moving deeper and deeper into consciousness and the idea of I am and surrender and trust. And so, yeah, that's, and if you ever, I also do ghostwriting and coaching, which is under the services tab.
Cool. So there you have it. You can get hold of Tim. We'll have all of his details in the show notes. But for all of you listening, don't give up on your dreams, okay? Like, they don't necessarily come when we want them to or expect them to. And I think that's the beauty of it, that the universe will serve and deliver what we believe we're worth, but also it will give it to us when we least expect it. So hang in there. Let me know what you thought of this podcast, and please do connect with the wonderful Tim.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm glad we finally met and connected.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time with another amazing guest on Kitty Talks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This podcast was sponsored by my Do Your Dharma course. Create a life so good that you pinch yourself. This 8-week online course demystifies Dharma and shows you how to tune in to why you're really here. Go to www.kittytalks.com/do your Dharma.